Welcome to the Mirja Vahala Art Studio, where inspiring minds meet. My name is Mirja Vahala, and this is the Acrylics for True Beginners workshop, which I have taught to hundreds of people over the past decade. It is now my privilege to share this workshop with you. It's my intention that by the time you've done all the projects on this DVD, that you'll have a solid understanding of how to use acrylic paints. It's also my intention to inspire your mind to continue on your path of being a great painter. Before beginning, I'll show you the different things we'll do within this workshop. We'll discuss our art supplies, we'll learn how to hold our brushes and how to make marks. We'll then do a color wheel using our primary colors, we'll do tinting of colors, we'll learn to mix blacks and grays, and we'll do shading of color. We'll then do gradations, glazing, blending, scumbling, and dry brushing. From there, we'll learn the magic of using a set of two colors plus white to create both this box painting and this sphere painting. We'll learn then how to use glazes of color to create a different temperature and a different mood of one of those paintings. From there, we'll create our masterpiece, the landscape painting, which we'll do step by step together. Then we'll learn to sign it and how to put a protective coating on it. This DVD is set up in such a way that for each project we do, there is a chapter. I suggest that you go through the DVD and do the project step by step as they're shown, as it'll make learning easier and a lot more fun. Let's get started. Shown here are some of the art supplies that we're going to play with during our workshop time. We're going to use our acrylic paints, which come in tubs like this and also in tubes. Acrylic paints are pigments held together by polymer medium, which is a type of plastic. If you leave it to dry in your clothes or on your brush, it's almost impossible to take off. I suggest that you wear old clothes or a bib like this. Also, what we're going to need are various brushes and a palette knife. We're going to use flat brushes, round brushes, a liner brush, and all these are made of synthetics, and we're going to use a fan brush like this, which is made of hog hair bristle. You're going to need to put your paints onto something. We're going to use a Stay Wet palette that has a wet sponge inside. We're going to need something to put our water into and something to paint on. We're going to use either canvasette paper that comes in a pad, or canvas bound over a board, or a wraparound canvas. You're also going to need something to clean your brushes with, which is, just some hand soap will do. And you're also going to need some transfer papers for transferring your drawings with. It comes in black and in white. If you don't have that, you can use soft pencil or graphite pencil and white chalk. The paints that we're going to use are Hansa Yellow Medium, Quinacridone Red, Quinacridone Magenta, Pyro Red Light, Phthalo Blue Green Shade, Ultramarine Blue, Burnt Sienna, Titanium White, and Gesso, which is a heavy white paint. You're also going to need a spray bottle, some paper towel, wax paper. You're going to need some masking tape, and you'll need an old towel to put on top of your table, some rags, and a blow dryer for drying your paints. I suggest too that you get yourself a sketchbook, which you can put a lot of information into, color notes, written notes, little sketches to show you things that you might want to do in the future. Mankind began making marks millions of years ago, and the way that you make marks on your canvas is the way that you express yourself. And people will actually be able to recognize your artwork by the way that you put marks onto your paper. It's a really important part of art. There's a lot of different ways of handling brushes, so I'll show you a few. Most often we'll use something called a pencil grip, which is holding your paintbrush much like you would a pencil. In all of our brushes, you can do these same things. So we have our round brush. That's what we're going to start with. I suggest that you try all the marks I'm going to show you holding your brush close to the ferrule, which is this metal thing here, halfway down, all the way at the end, and then step right away from your canvas like this. What we're going to do first is we're going to load our round brush. I'm going to take some dark paint so I can see it easily on here. First, you put your brush in your water. You might have some stiffener in it if it's a brand new brush. So clean that off in your water. Then go to the edge of your paint pile. I'm going to take my phthalo blue and put it underneath the phthalo blue on your palette. Then start to roll your brush through that paint by rolling your thumb over and under that handle, and that'll make your brush roll. Take a little medium if you need, and keep rolling that till it's nice and fluid. So with a close grip like this, Go to your easel and create a straight line with your brush just by going like that. So just play with that. And then try different pressures. Press light, hard, light, hard, light, hard. Then move along and using the tip of your brush, touch, pull, touch, pull, touch, pull, touch, pull. After trying all kinds of ways of making marks like dots, scumbles, whatever you can think of, try it. Then after you've done those things, try all those marks again, holding further down your handle, then further down again. You'll probably need to reload once in a while. And just play. It doesn't matter what you do, just have fun. Clean your brush off by rinsing it in the water. Now turn your hand, go like this and put your overhand like this. This is called a baton grip. This is handy for when you want to hold your brush closer to your surface when you're painting. Same way of loading, we go down to our palette, roll that paint through. Now try making marks holding your brush this way and see how much more paint comes off that brush. But by holding your brush this way, you're able to use the full length of that tip of the brush. To clean your brushes, you put your brush in the water, whoosh it around, and pull some of the water off on the edge of your paint bucket. Then take your brush to your soap. Get lots of soap on there, roll it around, rinse it in the water again, and then a nice clean piece of paper towel, pull the brush on there to make sure all the paint came off. With some of the colors, they're staining, so that you'll find that you can actually, it looks like your brush is still dirty, but this is clean, but the phthalo blue has stained those white bristles. Next, we're going to move on to our flat brush. I'm going to take my 1/4 inch flat to start with, and you can try all these marks with all your different brushes. Again, you're going to start with your pencil grip and try the other 2 marks, and do all the same marks that you've seen here. Get more paper if you need to. Now, going down to the palette, you're going to pull some paint onto your main palette from the pile, always working from the edge, and you're going to do something called tip loading. First, you're going to load your brush fully like this, where you go back and forth and you pat, pat, pat. Always pat your brush. It makes the paint go down the bristles nicely. Then go swing that brush through so that you get a nice tip onto that brush. Then go to your paper and close down like this, close pencil grip. Create nice straight lines by holding your brush perpendicular. Same as with your round brush, soft, hard, soft, hard. Try different marks. Flip your brush around, try the corners, turn the brush off and to use both sides of the brush. Go back to your palette, take some more paint. Now we're going to body load, or tip load, which is pulling the paint to the top half of your paintbrush. Again, always working from the edge of the pile when you pull. Now this puts a medium amount of paint onto your brush, so when you want to cover a medium area. Try different marks like that. You'll find that depending how wet or dry your brush is, that you'll have different amounts of this kind of mark and that kind of mark. Try doing a little bit of a calligraphy kind of mark where you go with your brush straight like this, then press harder, straight like this, and press harder. Anything you can think of, try. Back to your palette, we're going to get way more paint on our brush. We're going to load that brush up. There's lots of paint on there now, and you can see that you get way more paint. The last thing I want to show you with the flat brush is something called double loading. And that means that you're going to go to your palette, and on one half of your brush you're going to put one color, and on the other half you're going to put another color. It's just kind of fun. So you can see there, I turn my brush and there's a neat colors happen. It's also a way of getting change of color. So as I whoosh my brush around, there's a couple of different colors that happen in there. Next, we're going to use our liner brush, which is that short-handled brush. and it has a long bristle on it. Change your paper if you need to. You're going to need medium and a really liquidy type of paint, and you roll the paint brush through that paint like you did before on your palette. The way you hold this brush is you do hold it closer to the end. So hold your brush closer to the end and let that paint flow down to the tip. And then bring your brush, if you're going to do something like a branch, you start at the bottom of the branch and then you flick up. So you follow the same shape, come back up. So give that a try. But you can really control how thin those marks go at the end. It's also great for making grass shapes. And again, I'm using the pencil grip and holding it way at the top. So try that one out. Clean your brush off, lay it down flat. We're going to go to our fan brush. And this is the one where, it's the only one where I use a bristle rather than the synthetic. This is a brush that is really great for using for blending. And you can load this in much the same way as your flat brush. And just try making different marks. When you're playing with your brushes, what I do want you to do is with all your long-handled ones, try all three of those grips. Your pencil grip, your baton overhand grip, and being close to your easel and then stepping away from your easel. So now that you've cleaned all your brushes really well, we're ready to move on to the next lesson. Now that we've finished our color wheel, we're ready to move on to tinting and shading of color. Tinting and shading is a really important aspect of painting because you need 5 or more shades in a painting for it to really work well and have enough depth. What we're going to do first is we're going to tint colors. We're going to take the darkness of a color and lighten it with white. So I'm going to begin with phthalo blue. Taking my 1/2-inch flat brush, I'm going to put it on as dark as I can in a little rectangle, about the width of my brush, maybe a little wider. Now what you want to do on your palette is have enough of that blue to keep adding white so that you end up going all the way to white. You can use your palette knife for mixing a big pile of color rather than your brush when you get to this. It saves your brush from getting really mucky. So now I have this little pile of paint on my palette, and I've got a second shade of color which I put next. It's a little bit lighter. This is where you're going to want to learn how to squint your eyes. So you squint your eyes like this, and then you move away from your canvas and you look at what you've painted. By squinting, it removes some of the color and it helps you to see the shade of that. So that looks pretty good. So I'm going to take a little bit more white, add it to my pile of paint, leaving a little bit of that previous blue shade so I can see how much lighter I've gone. And I'm doing a figure 8 stroke. I'm really mixing that paint in, patting my brush so that that's nicely mixed on the bristles. Come back here and put down your next shade. Step back, give it a squint, you should see a bit of a change. Acrylic paints dry darker as they dry, so this is going to look a little bit darker later. Take more white, add it to the edge of that blue that you have already, mix it really well. I'm using that pencil grip and adding my next shade. And you want to keep doing this until you have at least 5 shades. On this color, because phthalo blue is a highly staining modern color, you can probably do a lot of different steps on this. And keep going until you've gone all the way to almost white. And this is where this tonal value bar comes in handy. This thing you can hold up here and compare your color to black and white. Again, squint your eyes, hold this up, and if you squint your eyes, you can see that this blue is almost a black kind of color. This is a little bit in that dark range still. We've moved into the next gray, the next gray, the next gray, and it keeps on going. So our goal is to go all the way to white. What we're going to do next is do the other 2 colors. We're going to do our quinacridone magenta, and we're going to do our Hansa yellow medium. Okay, so we've cleaned our brush off. It's ready to go for the quinacridone magenta. So pull that off from the edge of your pile, put it onto the quite a bit of it, pull it off onto the main part of your palette, load your brush up nicely, and place another mark. So as you did with your phthalo blue, you're going to keep adding white. Do that figure 8 motion and create more marks. And keep going until you have at least 5 to 9 shades done. So now we're going to move into Hansa Yellow Medium, which is our primary yellow. It's also the lightest color on our color wheel. Now that we have our brush cleaned off, we can get a pile of Hansa Yellow Medium onto our palette and place the mark onto our canvas. To that Hansa Yellow, add white. There's a little bit of white added to that. It's kind of hard to tell right there. So let's add a little bit more white again. Figure 8 motion, really move that paint into those bristles and make a mark. Keep adding to the edge of the pile of paint so that you can see what's happening. Add a little bit more white. It's pretty challenging to get a row of more than 4 or 5 shades in Hansa Yellow because it starts off so lightly in the first place. If you go back to comparing what we did here with the phthalo blue, then the quinacridone magenta, if you squint your eyes and look at the yellow, it's quite light. It's over in here somewhere. So you don't have much to work with in terms of tinting. And adding more white to that. See if you can get 5 shades out of that. Okay, so we've learned how to make colors lighter by tinting. Next what we're going to do is create our own blacks and learn how to make grays, and then we'll learn how to shade color. To start with, we're going to need our clean palette, lots of Pyrrole Red Light and the Phthalo Blue Green shade to create my first black. Creating blacks is a lot of fun. I enjoy creating my own because you can create warm blacks and cool grays and warm grays, which I'll show you. So pull some Pyrrole Red Light onto your palette and add some of that phthalo blue in there. And with that figure 8, mix that paint together. Now create a mark partway into your canvas and see those 2 colors. It's quite magical actually. I find it amazing how you take, you'd never know that you'd get a black from those 2 colors. Now if I add some white to that black mixture and I'm mixing it off to the side, so I'm leaving some of the black there, I'll discover that I'll have a wonderful gray. So there we go, we have the gray right there. So to start with, we had that phthalo blue. Then we took the Pyrrole Red Light. We mixed those 2 things together on our palette. We came up with black. We added white to that and we came up with gray. Now the really fun thing about mixing grays is I can change up my grays by adding red, that Pyrrole Red Light, to my gray, and I get what is called a warm gray. So we're going to put a mark here and you can see this is actually considered a gray. In arts, grays are called neutrals as well. And it just means that it's not the pure brightness of the original color. It's a mixture of 2 colors, often opposite on the color wheel, which these things are. Now I want to create a cool color, so I'm going to add more blue to that gray pile that I have, and add white, a little bit more white. And you can see that now I have a cooler blue. But that is still considered a gray because it has some of that other color in it. So I was mentioning earlier that grays are created by 2 colors that are opposite on the color wheel. I'm just going to bring the color wheel back up here to show you what I mean. So the Pyrrole Red Light that we purchased for this workshop lives on the color wheel on the orange area right there. And the Phthalo Blue, green shade, as you know, lives down here. They're opposite on the color wheel and those are called complementary colors. When you mix complementary colors together and you add white, you end up with a gray. The really exciting thing about creating the complementary colors is when you mix them together, you can create an entire painting. And that's how we'll be creating both our box painting and our sphere painting and our masterpiece as well. Those are the only colors that we need. I'm going to show you one more way of making blacks. It's another color, complementary color scheme, colors opposite on the wheel. What we're going to use is our ultramarine blue. Now you can see this is a warmer, more royal kind of blue than that one. And the reason why I'm showing you these 2 colors is you might prefer the look of how these are compared to the other 2 colors. Burnt sienna is the other color that we're going to use, and it is a great color for using for dulling down any kind of color really. So I'm going to show, so on the color wheel this lives, the burnt sienna lives slightly inside of the color wheel because it's an earth color and it's opposite to that blue violet. In our ultramarine blue, lives right there. So we're going to mix those two colors together, the ultramarine blue and the burnt sienna, and we're going to create another black. Add white to that, and we have a gray. If you add a bit of burnt sienna to that, you're going to get a warm gray. So you can see that's a little bit more on the taupey or browner side. To that, if you add more of the ultramarine blue, it becomes even cooler. My goal for you is to be able to create a combination like this of a warm brown, a kind of a middle gray, and a cooler type of neutral. Once we've done this, what we're going to do next is mix ourselves a pile of black using our phthalo blue and our pale red light, and we'll move on to shading our colors. So now that we have our brush cleaned off and we have a pile of black paint mixed up together, we're ready to start shading. We're going to take our pyro red light and put down a mark, and we're going to create a row like we did on our tinting. So pull some of that red down onto the main part of your palette. Take a little bit of that black mixture that you've made, add it to that pile that's on your palette, and make a mark. And you can see that this color has become a little bit browner, a little bit more neutral, a little bit more dull. In art, you're going to hear the words neutral, brightness, intensity. Intensity and brightness are exactly the same thing. This is the full intensity of pyro red light. I've added a little bit of its complement, the opposite color on the color wheel, and I've dulled it down a little bit, made it more neutral. Add a little bit more of that black, and make another mark. Complementary color schemes are very magical. They're also one of the most popular paintings that are purchased because you're using such a limited palette, and it's kept quite simple. You get this wonderful continuity of color. And keep going, adding your darks. And what you do is you just keep going until you've gone all the way back to black. And that is basically what shading is. It's adding black to a color to make it go darker. Now we're going to create our basic color wheel. You can create every color under the sun using your primary colors. Our primary colors are Hansa Yellow Medium. We're going to use Phthalo Blue, which lives here. Clean that brush off in between. We're going to use two different reds because there is a red that works better to mix the violets, and there's a red that's better to mix the orange colors. So the red that's going to sit here is quinacridone red. The color that sits here is quinacridone magenta. So what you're going to do on your palette is you're going to put a little bit of yellow down below your yellow pile, and we're going to create a secondary color green. So to create that, we add a little bit of phthalo blue green shade to that yellow, and then make a mark on your color wheel right there. So there's your secondary green. Then we're going to create tertiary colors which live in between the primary and the secondary. I'm going to add more yellow to the left side of that original green that I made and make a pretty yellow green. It's a pretty color. Then on my palette on the right side of that same green pile, I'm going to add a lot more blue and create blue-green, which is a nice turquoise color. That turquoise is a little hard to see what color it actually is in its full form, so I'm going to take a little bit of white, add it to that color, and put a mark to the side. That way I can see what the actual color is. Then go ahead and do the same thing to each one of those colors, and then do the same thing with your phthalo blue so you can see what that looks like when it's tinted. So you're going to do this exact same procedure for your other two sets of colors. You're going to take your yellow, and you're going to take your quinacridone red, and you're going to mix them together and make your orange, and then take your orange and mix it with your yellow and make your yellow orange, and so on until you're finished your color wheel. Just make sure that when you get down to your violets and blue violets that you take your quinacridone magenta and add it to your phthalo blue. Now that we've done our color wheel, tinting, shading, and making of blacks, we're ready to move on to new skills, and the next one is blending. We're going to start with our flat brush, and we can use our larger flat brush, which is our 3/4 inch. Pick up some medium and paint a rectangle of this onto your canvas. You can tell by the shine when you look at it where you've placed this. Next, what you're going to do is you're going to pick two colors. I'm going to take my phthalo blue and pull some of it on, and I'm going to tip load my brush and start at the top of this shiny pile, and with my pencil grip, moving my brush back and forth, and see how flat my brush goes to that canvas. Now, moving reasonably quickly, I'm going to clean my brush off and pick up some of that complementary color, Pyro Red Light. Tip load my brush again, but now I'm going to start down here. Again, see how flat my brush is going? And as I move up towards that other color, I'm going to go a little softer and lighter and just pull that brush through. This is also called wet on wet. And so you got a nice little blend there. You've got a transition from the red to this sort of in-between blackish gray color up into the blue. Now that we've done that, we're going to clean off our flat brush and lay it down to dry. And we're going to try this again with a fan brush. So now we're ready to move on to our bristle fan brush, and we're going to do another blend, and we're going to do it the same way as this, where we put some medium down. Once you have that, grab whatever color you want. I'm going to start with that blue again because I already have some down on my palette, and place it on top. Now I'm holding my hand further up the handle. Now I'm going to go over to my white on my palette. I'm tip loading my fan brush, going here, back and forth. Again, it's a light touch, and blend that. So you can see with the fan brush, it's quite easy to do a blend like that. So now that we've done that, I'm going to show you how to do a gradation. It's exactly the same thing as we just did. Let's try it without any medium in the background, but really thick paint. So I'm body loading my fan brush with quite a bit of paint, so that paint's really thick. I'm going to add a little bit of white to that paint, and then start here and then work back up in. Add more white paint, half in, half out. Add some more white to that. Now, gradations are easier to do if you make sure you have enough paint on your palette to add the white to. Otherwise, you run out of paint and then you're trying to match that shade again, and it's very difficult to do. And that's it. So you're trying to go from darker to lighter as you move down. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to move back into our flat brush and do something called juxtaposed or optical blending. I'm going to use my 1/2-inch flat brush. And I'm going to start with my blue concoction again, the dark blue. I'm going to do a pencil grip that's partway down the handle, and I'm going to let my brush do a nice little stroke like that, move down into a little bit lighter paint, and let those brush strokes show, a little bit whiter paint, and keep going. So the goal again is to do a gradation of darker to lighter. So now that I've done that, I'm going to do a totally different color right beside that. The reason why we're learning how to do this is a method that Impressionist painters would use. They would do color side by side next to each other, and when you step back, it actually creates a third color. Add more white to that Pyro Red. So that's called optical blending or juxtaposed colors. They're colors side by side. If you look at this from across the room, it almost will start to turn grayish looking on you. So now we're ready to get started on our glazing and our scumbling and our dry brushing. To get ready for our glazing and scumbling, we're going to put down a few colors. So we need to place a yellow bar, clean off our brush, and then we want to put down a magenta bar of color right next door. I'm using my flat brush. And we want a second magenta bar over here. And we need a phthalo blue bar as well. Once you have those down, we'll blow dry that to make sure it's nice and dry. For doing glazing methods, we want to make sure that our water is clean and that the surface underneath is really dry. What glazing is putting a layer of transparent color over another color. We're going to first take our phthalo blue, which is a very transparent color, and we're going to use our flat brush, and we're going to take some of that polymer medium and mix it in. The polymer medium allows you to really thin paint down for glazing. Taking your brush on a very sideways angle, run that across. And it's very magical. We've got the yellow turned to green and the magenta turned into a lovely violet kind of color. So clean your brush off again. Take your Hansa yellow medium, which is also a transparent paint, add that medium to it and put a stroke across. So that transparent color caused the magenta to turn to a different color, and it caused the yellow to remain the same color. Clean your brush off really well. Grab some of that magenta, some of the medium again to thin it down. One thing about acrylic paints is you can thin them down quite a bit with water, but when you get to a certain level of watering it down, it won't stick to your surface anymore, so you need to add that medium into it. Now the yellow turned into a different looking orange than this one when you put the magenta on top instead. So that's it for glazing. It's a great way to change the colors of a painting, which we'll do later on. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to do some scumbling, and we're going to take our round brush and grab some paint on it. I suggest that you grab some Hansa Yellow Medium. So on your palette, load her up and then pat some of the paint off onto your towel so there's not that much paint left on, even though it feels kind of strange to put paint on and off, it does work. Go into your baton grip and turn your brush sideways. If you want to rest your pinky onto your canvas, you can. And then just start to move your brush around in different directions like that, letting that tip end touch the paint underneath. What you're doing is you're putting more opaque or thicker paint on top and letting some of that underneath paint show through. Notice how I'm swinging my brush around in different directions and twisting with my wrist. What this does is it helps your paint to skip around. Another way that you can scumble is, or make that scumbling look, is take paper towel and dab like that. So one more thing to show you before we move on to our next lesson is we're going to do something called dry brushing. Dry brushing is quite easy to do with a fan brush. You want to make sure that it's dry. You take thickish paint again, dab the tips of that fan brush, take some of the paint off, and then at a very sideways angle to your canvas. This is why we want to be using your canvas board or canvas right now, because you can just touch the surface of that. It gives little bumps of color. This is wonderful for wood grain, for sparkles on water. Now that we've done that, we're ready to move on to painting our box painting and our sphere painting. We're now ready to begin our box painting, and this is going to really help us create our masterpiece, the landscape, later, because we'll learn lots of skills in doing this. The first thing we're going to learn is why we use a ground, and a ground is color that we put over our entire canvas. On this one, we're going to use ultramarine blue as a ground, and the other color we're going to use in this painting is its opposite, which is burnt sienna. So what you can do is you can take your tube of acrylic paint and actually squeeze a little bit right onto your canvas, and then take a little bit of water on your brush, a little bit of medium, and just spread that around. If you find the paint's a little bit sticky and hard to move, take a little bit of your water, spritz it on, and it'll help that paint to flow. I have some more ultramarine blue on my palette, which I'm putting on here. This is not like painting a wall. It doesn't have to be perfectly even. Now that we have that covered, we're going to clean off our brush and blow dry this so it's really dry before we start the next step. Now that that's nice and dry, what you're going to need is your line drawing of the box and your white transfer paper. If you're a good drawer, you can just use some white chalk and draw this directly on. So there's your line drawing taped on, and then you can take some of your transfer paper, you slide it underneath, that's working just fine. If you don't have transfer paper like that, the other option is to take white chalk. On the back of your line drawing, put lots of chalk. And then when you put this back over and you press on that, the chalk will transfer through. We're going to learn how to paint somewhat how the masters did with oils, and that's dark to light. So our darkest side of this is here on this side. The light is coming through this way, and so the shadow is getting cast to the left. I'm going to grab my 1/2 inch flat brush. I'm going to go into my burnt sienna and ultramarine blue mixture. And I'm going to mix this quite thin actually, and I'm going to create a middle kind of color on here. I'm going to double load my brush so there's a little bit of brown. I have a more bluish mixture on my palette. And I'm going to put a little bit of brown on the corner of my brush. When you get to the edge of your box, you can turn your brush and pull in like that. To thin your paint down, you want to add a little bit of that medium. Once you've done that, you want to then paint some of your shadow in. When we do our shadow, which is almost as dark as our box, the edge here gets lost into this part of the box. When you get to this edge here, just do a little bit of a dry brush motion and pull your paint through. Squint your eyes once in a while and step back while you're painting to see how you're going. The really interesting thing about this is it doesn't look like much at first, but by the time you put in all your other shades, it's going to be three-dimensional looking. So once you have that down, the next step is the next darkest side, which is this side here. It's going to require a little bit of a gradation and adding a little bit of white to our paint. So we're going to go a little bit darker to lighter here. So I've added a little bit of white paint to my brush. Now here that's looking a little bit cool. I'm going to add a little bit more warmth to that by adding the brown. Notice how I've tip loaded and I'm pulling through here and then dance that across again. To the edge of the pile on my palette, I'm adding a little bit more white, and by using a really light touch there, I create that blend in. Add a little bit more white paint. I'm going to cut down with the end of my brush. Remember that perpendicular hold like that and then pull in. Wipe some of that paint off of your brush, and then between those two colors, do a little dance. Okay, so we have our two sides done. We have our dark side and our mid-tone side. Now we're going to move over and we're going to paint the lightest side of our box, which is the top. So I'm using the lightest color that I started with here, or ended up with here. Added a little bit of brown to it to make it warmer. Using the tip of my brush, I can cut an edge right there and then pull it in. Once I've done that, I can do a bit of that dance. Squint, step back, take a look. I'm going to go to this side and add white, and then pull through into that other paint. I think we could go a little bit lighter on this edge yet. And I'm just feathering it over. So what our goal is here is put in as much paint as possible over this whole surface before we go in and get really fussy. What you're also learning on this painting is something called negative space painting. Instead of painting the background first, we're going to do it after this box and learn how to cut around something. So our next area we're going to do is we're going to paint this background here. Same two colors, and your goal is to make this side a little bit darker and going a little bit lighter as you move to the right where the light's coming from. This is another lost edge, so we're losing the edge a little bit in there. We're going to cut around this edge and go over. Notice how this is a little bit warmer here and this is a bit cooler. That's going to make this come a bit more forward from the background. As your brush goes to the right, start adding more light paint. Okay, step back, give it a look, squint your eyes. So we want to start working on our foreground here. It's a little bit lighter because the light would bounce off of that tabletop. When I come next to the shadow, I take my brush and I go half, very lightly like a scumble, that scumble we learned, into that shadow and work around it. Same with here, a little bit of a light touch. So take that color that you have on your brush and put it in a few places on your surface. I'm purposely going a little bit warmer on the front corner to make it come forward. I'm going to add a little bit more light to my color, a little bit thicker paint, and I'm going to cut along the edge of that box. Create the edge of that table, cut into the edge of this. Now I'm moving fairly fast to show you how to do this, but you take your time and try different things. So now you've done what you need to do in terms of blocking in an entire painting. The next step is just to go in and make all the main changes that you want to make. I can see I want to make this little edge here show a little bit more so you can see the box. You can always turn your canvas around to make it easier to get into areas. I'm dry brushing so that I can feather into the background that's already there. I'm going to scumble a little bit of up here, and the reason why is you want to have a continuity of color. You want this box to look like it belongs. And just play until you get to a place where you think that it's working. Okay, and step back and take a look. So keep going. If there's any more things that you want to do, you basically got the idea. You started with the darks, you then went to your midtones and did a gradation from dark to light, heading towards where the light source is. The top part of your box was lighter. You then learned about negative space painting, working around that painting, around that box, and then you did your foreground colors here, and you did a little bit of a soft edge onto your shadow. So if there's anything else you feel like you need to do on yours, keep on going. Congratulations on doing your box painting, and we're ready to move on to our sphere. So now we're ready to begin our sphere painting. We're going to do this one in a set of different colors, the Pyrrole Red Light and the Phthalo Blue Green shade. And we're going to start this one on a yellow-orange background. Take your Hansa Yellow Medium and squeeze a little bit onto your canvas, along with some of your Pyrrole Red Light. Put some water on your brush and pick up a little bit of that medium and just start whooshing that around. Again, we're not painting a wall. It's okay if the colors come out unevenly. Once you have that on, blow dry it really well. Now that that's nice and dry, we're going to put on a drawing for the sphere. Just for fun, let's try using something that's round, maybe the bottom of a yogurt container, and a little bit to the right of your 8x10 canvas. Just trace your circle like that. This is just to show you that you can use chalk to draw things on. Then on part way down, draw a straight line across for where this sphere would sit, and then we need a little bit of a shadow under here, and the shadow is a little bit of it's shaped like an ellipse or an oval. Your goal on this is to make a sphere that is a little bit warmer in color, and what we're going to do is we're going to start by putting a bit of medium on the inside of this shape. Now that I have that on there, I'm going to take some of the Phthalo Blue and Pyrrole Red Light and make a dark that's a little bit more on the red side. And starting on the bottom left of this, with my brush flat like this, I'm going to follow the edge of that sphere, and then as I come up here, turn your brush and make kind of a crescent shape. To that color, add a little bit more red and start moving up towards where the light would be coming from, which is this direction here. Add a little bit more red. And as you come to this edge, turn your brush if you need to. Now just start to blend some of those colors together. Remember, you can always use your baton grip and go in there to blend. Picking up a little bit more of that dark color and just darkening up a little bit more. As I move up towards the light, I'm now going to start adding some white to that. And I'm going to start on the outside lighter edge. I'm going to turn my brush around so that I can use that edge again. Notice how by making short strokes like that, it's easier to do an edge on a circle. Turn your brush back around and start pulling some of that paint back into the paint that you have already. For the sphere, do a little bit of a mark like that, that's on a curve, and pull it into that paint. And start moving your brush around with your wrist moving like that and your elbow going up and down. And then do a little bit of a curve there and pull that paint until it just feathers into the other part of the circle. Taking the corner of your flat brush, do a little bit of what's called reflected light. So the light will be hitting this countertop and bouncing up onto that sphere. Take your finger and just blend that in a bit. Step back, squint at it. So now I know I need a little bit more light up on this edge here. I'm going to switch over to my round brush, grab some white on there, just a little tiny bit of pink, and start working that edge a bit more. And start scumbling into that other color. And use your finger for blending. And go a little bit around that edge there. And lastly, some really bright white. To make that look shiny. So clean your round brush, and let's go back to our 1/2 inch flat. So now we're going to do our background just like we did on the box. Now your goal on this one is we're using slightly more intense colors. You can see more of the red on this, and we're going to allow some of this background to show through, and we're going to make this color a dark blue to a light blue. So I'm going to my phthalo blue, adding a little bit of that red to it just to make it a little duller, a little more neutralized, a little grayer. But notice when you put it on here how different that looks than the first painting we did. Now again, play with your brush strokes. You don't have to use a flat brush. You can try any brush you like. Maybe you'd like to try your fan brush. Every once in a while, put a little bit more of the red on than the blue. Again, you can go to the edge of a shape, cut in like that with your flat brush, and then pull out. I think I want to go a little bit lighter. I'm going to add a little bit more white to that paint and work it into that other half I have already. Yeah, that's nice. I'm just going to bring a little bit of this stuff over here just because it feels like I should. Okay, I'm adding more light as I go over here. I'm going to go back to my blue and Pyro red light combination, thinning that paint down with some of the medium and starting to cut that shadow in underneath. When you put a bit of paint down and then feather it out like that so you get a nice soft edge to that thing. While you have that blue there, you could put a little bit of it to the bottom of your sphere here, just to cool and darken that edge. So once you have your shadow put under there, you're now going to work on your foreground, just like you did on your box. I'm using slightly more intense color. Again, when you come up to the edge of this shadow, give it a little bit of a soft blend. Cut in around your sphere. I'm letting a little bit more of that warmth show through. Squint at your painting, step back, see what you might like to do. But what I want to show you next, before we move on to our masterpiece painting, is how to glaze and change the mood and temperature of a painting. So now I'm going to show you the fun of taking glazes of transparent color and changing the mood of a painting. Here's a sphere painting that I've done that is in cool and temperature. So I'm going to take a flat brush. It's nice and soft. It doesn't really matter what size. Also, I have a rag that I'm going to put a little bit of water on and squeeze that water out. And I'm going to take some Hansa yellow, medium, and a little bit of quinacridone magenta to make it an orangey color, and lots of medium. And I'm going to go over top of this painting in places and change the color. I think I'm going to add a little bit more red to that and make it a lot more reddish color. There we go. So we can totally change the way this feels just by glazing color over top. The reason I have a rag in my hand is that if I put down some color and it's too much, I can go over top and just wipe off a little bit. I'm going to grab a little bit more yellow and not very much red in there at all and see what happens. The one thing you need to be aware of when you're glazing though is when you do put another layer of color on, you're actually darkening it again. So you might need to go and lighten up some areas after. Now we finished our box painting and our sphere painting, and we've done glazing and changing the temperature and mood of a painting. Now what if you've got a painting and there's an area, you like most of it, but there's an area that you really don't like? This is where your gesso comes in. It's that heavy white paint. Like just, well, say that I don't like the way my background turned out. All I have to do is basically white it out. And I'm cutting around that sphere. So once you have that on, dry the paint really well, and then we'll move on to putting the background on again. Okay, we have that white gesso put on, so now we're going to put that ultramarine blue background back onto the surface. So once you have this color put on here and you're happy with that surface, you go and you paint your whole background again and your painting's done. We're now ready to begin our masterpiece, the landscape painting. You have accomplished so much already. You've learned brush handling, you've learned how to do tints and glazes and shading, gradations, scumbling, and so much more. You also created a box painting and a sphere painting. In creating these, you used two different sets of colors that were opposite on the color wheel. What you want to do now is take a look at these and decide which of the two you like the colors better of. I've decided to use the sphere painting, which began on the yellow-orange background, and the two colors I used were Pyro Red Light and Phthalo Blue Green shade. To start with, we're going to need to have our canvas ready to go and your 3/4 inch long-handled brush. And our next step is to get our background ground put onto our canvas. So I'm going to go and take my Hansa Yellow and my Pyro Red Light and double load it on my brush and then begin to put the paint onto my canvas. If you find that it's a little bit dry with your paint, you can spritz a little bit of water onto your canvas, and you can also take a little bit of medium onto your brush too, and that helps that paint to spread more easily. So I'm aiming for a yellow-orange color. Take lots of paint on your brush, and I've double loaded it so I get this nice, interesting, changing background. So keep going with this until you have your whole surface covered. Include the edges too if you like, and paint all the way around. So what you want to do is get this whole surface covered with these two colors to create that yellow-orange, and once you have that done, let it dry or blow dry it, and then we can start the next part. So now this is dry, we're ready to do the next stage, which is to transfer the line drawing onto our canvas. So we're going to need our line drawing and some tape. So the first thing we're going to do is tape this onto our canvas. Just find the corners of where that goes and line it up, fold it over, and tape it onto the back of your canvas just to keep it on. You then take your transfer paper. I'm going to use the black one because I have a light background. And if you don't have the paper, you can do as you did in the sphere and box drawing and use your graphite stick. Or if you're doing the blue background, it's quite dark, you might want to use the chalk. So just take a pen, have this lid under. Make sure this is under the right way, like that it's the correct surface hitting your canvas. Take your pen and we're just going to put in our horizon line here where the water goes and some of these mountain sections. You can ignore the bird and the island. You might want to check to make sure that your drawing is transferring okay, and mine is, so it's all working okay. You might want to give yourself a little bit of an indication of where this little hill is, and down into here. You can also trace down here where you see the edge of the water. Oh, and then we also have the edge of the cloud up top here. Okay, so we'll just flip this up and we'll make sure that we can see the main lines of what we're going to be doing, and it looks pretty good. Just check. I think I'll just put this little bit in here too. And that's all we need for right now. So we're going to take this off. We don't need that anymore. Then we'll remove the line drawing. Now we have enough here to get ready for the next part of our painting, which is to paint the background mountains, the sky, and the clouds. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our phthalo blue and our pyro red light, or if you're working with the other set of colors, your burnt sienna and your ultramarine blue. So get your blue and a little bit of the red and pull it down onto your palette. Take some white from the edge of your pile, and I'm using the 1/2 inch brush right now, the flat chisel, and I'm mixing a warmish gray color to begin this first set of mountains. What we're going to be doing is creating something called aerial perspective. An aerial perspective is something where you make something feel closer in use of color and shade, and then we slowly cool down the colors and make them lighter so that the distant clouds and mountains feel further away. So we're going to start on the right hand side of our canvas. And this is looking a little bit cool, so I'm going to add a little bit more red and then try that. That's a little bit better. I'm using a vertical stroke to mimic how trees might grow. And then I'll just turn my brush and use both sides of the brush. Don't worry too much if you go down into the water bit, because you're going to be covering that over later on. Continue loading your brush. If you need to, put a little bit more water on your brush, grab a little bit more paint, and you can always use that medium as well. And you can maybe bring some strokes straight across here just to smooth that out. That is all you need for your very first step on this canvas. We've got our first row of mountains, and then we're going to move on to our next. To do our next set of mountains, we're going to add a bit more blue and a little bit more white. So what we're doing is making that color a little cooler and a little bit lighter. Hold your brush up to the canvas and see what that looks like compared to the previous color. See how that feels cooler? It's a little bit more blue. And we're going to cover up this whole section here. Your goal on doing this part of the painting is just to block in. We're not trying to do a finished piece yet. We just want to get paint over the whole surface of this canvas, and then after we've done that, we'll go in with all the details. So we have the second set of hills put in here. And what we want to do is go again down to our palette, add a little bit more blue and a little bit more white, and make that even lighter. You can hold your brush up again and see what that looks like. I think that I could go a little bit darker with that, so I'm going to add a little bit more blue and a little bit more red to that again, just to darken it a bit. I added just a bit too much white. Hold that up. That's a little bit better. If you feel like you're not getting enough flow into your paint, you can always add a little bit of medium into that paint as well. Bring this hillside all the way down into this little area here. Every once in a while, squint at your painting, step back a little further and give it a look, and see if you're getting enough of the change of shades from dark to lighter to lighter. The other decision that you want to make is how much of this orangey background do you want to show through. That is totally a decision that is personal. Looking at this, I can see I can make that a little bit darker. I'm not going to worry about that right now. I'm going to continue on with some of my other colors. But while I have this color on my brush, I'm going to move up into the sky and put that color down as well. Now I'm using a sideways stroke to give a sense of the sky up there. A different brush stroke to show the viewer of your painting that it's a different area of the painting. So finish that little piece in there. Okay, so you have the sky part done, and we're going to move on next to creating the clouds. I'm adding quite a bit more white to my mixture. Change the color a little bit as you go across. You don't have to have a perfectly even color. It's much more interesting to have a change of color as you move along. Also, I'm starting to use thicker paint now. The lighter the color, the more white you add, the thicker the paint. Makes the painting look much more interesting. Also in here, when I'm doing this cloud bank, go back to remember your pencil grip and move your wrist around and get this nice motion going on. And let that brush dance across the canvas. It's easier to allow that to happen by moving even further away and moving your hand down the length of the brush and getting your body away from your canvas. The fun thing about acrylic paints is you can work in layers and layers. You want to work right over to the left of your painting. We're going to put the trees on top later, so we want this sky to show through. So you want this to be the way that you want it before we put the trees on. Enjoy the process. There are no rules. Everybody's painting always turns out different in classes, and they're all wonderful. I'm adding a little bit more white to my paint as I go along, and thicker. So I'm body loading my brush, I'm doing the figure 8, and I have a lot of paint on my brush now. So that way I can get those nice whites on top. And I'm letting some of that grayish stuff show through underneath. Later on, when we're doing some of our finessing, we're going to darken some of these things up, get a bit more contrast, and put in the mist and clouds. So when you're finished painting your sky, blow dry it, get your painting dry, and we'll move on to painting our rocks and our trees. Now we're ready to begin the next step. Our painting is dry and we're going to paint in our trees and a little bit of that foreground hillside. We're going to take our line drawing again and tape it back on. Take our transfer paper again and slide it underneath. And just press our paper down. What we want to transfer next are the trees, these marks here, and a little bit, we already have that edge, so just the trees. You don't have to be too fussy and exact with this, it's just to give you an idea of where to place things. While we're here, we're also going to trace our island over. It's another dark area. Let's just check that out. I can see my island where I am, but if you can't, you can always use your white transfer paper or your chalk to put that on. So we can put away that line drawing, and then we're going to paint our trees. Before we do that though, I think it'd be a good idea to practice the method and the brush strokes and then move on to our actual canvas. We're going to practice on just any kind of paper. You can just get some computer paper, for instance, like this, and tape it onto your canvas. I suggest that you use your 1/2 inch flat brush and then load some dark paint onto your brush. But I want to thin that paint down. I'm going to load a corner of my brush with the blue and a corner of my brush with that red. And I'm also going to dip into my medium to thin that paint so that it has a really nice flow to it. I'm going to take a little bit more red into that. I'm going to tip load this from our lesson of tip loading. It gives it a nice chisel area for your paint to be on. The first thing we're going to do to practice is we're going to give ourselves a tree trunk to work on. So we're going to do our brush stroke sideways like this, a little bit wider at the bottom and thinner as we go up. Let's reload our brush, swing it through that paint, and let's put a second tree trunk on. What you want to do again is load your brush by pulling your paint through the brush, tip loading again. Now it's important that the paint has some flow, so you want some of that medium in there. On here, what you want to do is have your hand part way down your handle of your brush and in this kind of a pencil grip, and then start at the bottom of your tree and start to swing. Swing that brush back and forth. You can see why you need to have fluid paint. And as you move up higher on the tree, those little marks get a little bit smaller. You can move your way back down add some more branches. Just practice going back and forth like that. By practicing on the paper first, it'll give you more confidence to actually paint the trees onto your canvas. So once you're happy with how your trees look on here and you feel confident to move on, we'll then go onto our canvas and paint the trees onto there. So we're ready to go with this part of our painting. Again, the same colors. We're going to now begin this part of painting in our trees. We are loading our brush up, and then we're starting to put in those tree trunks. Turn your brush over to get the paint on the other side. A little bit wider at the bottom, a little bit thinner as you go up. Make sure that you paint far enough down into where that little hillside is too. Let the colors change a little bit. You can go back in once in a while and add a little bit of red or blue just to make it interesting. Have fun. Remember, this doesn't have to be perfect. It's not a photograph, it's a painting. You can let your brush stroke show. So once you have your tree trunks finished, let's blow dry them, and then we can put on our branches. So now we're ready to begin putting on our branches. So you have the same two colors. Make sure that paint is fluid enough. Add some medium to that paint. Body load that brush, pat the brush, and tip load as well. So starting at the bottom of our trees, start to swing load those branches in. Don't worry if they look a little funny at first. By the time you've done all these, it's really quite magical. Just by having enough shape in there, all of a sudden you'll have trees. You don't want to cover up all your sky. You want that to be, the sky to be shining through on your painting between those trees. There would be some trees sneaking over from the corner too, so you want to have some branches coming out there too. Helps to step away a little bit once in a while and see what's happening with those branches. I'm moving from the red to the blue as well, just changing up that color a little bit. You're going to continue with creating this part of your trees, but I'm going to go ahead and show you the right-hand side. Swing and put a main branch on the top edge of some of those branches. And then you can build up the bottom of the branches by taking the corner of your flat brush and doing a little bit of a flick mark like that. So you're doing a main branch like that, you're swinging it out, and then from that main branch you're going to pull some marks out and let that little soft brush stroke come out of the edge of that. Keep building up the right hand side of those branches, same way all the way down. One thing that is important is you want to get this one branch here to come out a little bit further than the others. It's going to create a directional line to that bird that we're going to paint later, which is going to be our focus or our focal point. So keep on going with your trees, get them done the way that you like, and I'll do the same. Now we have our trees in place up here. We're going to continue with creating our dark hillside here and also our island in the background. So same two colors. Start to block in the hillside. Notice that I'm using that swinging motion with my brush, just like I did when we were doing the clouds up here. Get the top edge first done on here. And keep working your way down. As you get down into the area down here, change your brush stroke a little bit to be in a bit of an arc like this. And keep your brush moving in that kind of a manner and fill in that foreground. Your brush will spread out a little bit in a few places and catch the edge in a few places. The purpose of this is it's going to create almost like a little template for you to follow for painting your rocks later on. The sun is coming over from this direction here, so we're backlighting these trees. There's going to be more light on this edge, and as this moves around to this side, it's going to be darker. We're also going to be painting over top of our rocks, creating the lights and midtones in there. While you're here and you have these colors on your brush, you might as well come down here and going into a horizontal type of stroke, put in this shadow in the water. I'm using the chisel tip of my brush and I sweep over into that other spot and then turn my brush sideways and fill more area in. Once you've done this section, we'll then move on to the island. I'm going to add a little bit of white to my dark combo, just so that the island feels a little bit further back, but I still want to make it look warmish. Okay, so I'm taking a look at that there. In here is where we're going to block the island in. I'm using the up and down stroke. Then turn your brush sideways like this, perpendicular to your canvas, and create some upstrokes. That's going to feel like distant trees, and it's going to give you something to work around for creating and fixing up this background that we're going to do later. So that's all you need to do for your island. So we've got the trees blocked in, we've got this dark section here, we have the dark put down here, and we've got this island over here on the right-hand side. I think we're ready to move on to the water. So now we're ready to work on our water. I'm still going to use the same brush I've been using all along, which is the 1/2" chisel, and we're going to use similar colors that we used up in the sky areas down here. So mix a few different colors ready to go on your palette, a little bit of grays on your warm side and some on your cool side. And start to make some horizontal brush strokes across your canvas. So pencil grip again. Just start swinging your brush across. One of the goals that you want to have in the painting is where the distant water is. You have less brush stroke showing and allow more brush stroke in the foreground. That's going to help this feel further back and this closer. Also, the other goal when we're doing the water is to have a little bit more reds or warmth in this front end, and that'll make this feel like this is distant and this is coming towards us, because warm colors come forward and cool colors recede. I'm now moving to the foreground, so I'm adding a little bit more red into my paint. And as you come over to this side, we have this little dark area, and we're going to cut around it and make it a shape. So we have some water come in this way, it comes out, cuts back in. Change my color a bit, a little bit more red, cuts in, comes out. Just get a really nice little rhythm going on in there. This is a bit of a mid-tone. It's not the lightest we're going to do. And to make the water look shiny, you're going to have some light areas and some darker areas. Right here where these rocks hit, there'll be a little bit of shallower water, so we can go in there and just darken that little spot up just a little bit. So keep going on with that, and once you have that type of tonality down on onto your water, what you want to do is start adding more white to the colors that you have down on your palette, and start to create some areas of shine. This is going to be a lot whiter up here, as if the light is shining through this part of the clouds. So what's going to happen down in this little section of the water, it's going to be lighter. So I've got a lot more white paint on my brush, and swinging my brush side to side, so I get a little bit of a zigzag right there, and get a bit of a highlight. Bring this down and let your brush, I've tip loaded that brush again, and I'm letting the brush just swing across and creating some shapes in there. You can see already it's starting to look a little more shiny as we add that lightness. There'll be shiny areas in other parts of the water, so you can take a little bit of that light, and maybe in that horizon line at the back, add a little bit of light. Not right underneath the island, because there might be a bit of shading under there. And just choose some spots where you want to put your light. What you want to do is continue with your water, keep adding more lights and change of color as you go along, and build the water up until you're happy with it. If you want to make the water look shinier, remember you just need to have some darkness around some light. Before painting the rocks on our masterpiece, I'll illustrate some techniques that we can use. First, take some children's chalk and begin to draw your rocks on your colored ground in a swinging motion. and create a variety of sizes and shapes. So what we're going to do next is we're going to take our flat brush and load it with a thin dark paint. We're going to paint from dark to light. So consider where the shadows would be and where the light would be coming from. So paint down into the crevices of the shadows. So that's your first step, just to put down some of those thin darks. The next step that we're going to do is put down our midtones. So we need to add some white to that dark paint. So look for the places where you need to put that mid-tone paint. And I'll just do a couple of rocks here. I suggest at this stage that you take your grayscale and see how your darks and your midtones are doing. Compare your darks to your darks and your midtones to your midtones to make sure that you're in the right shades. Those are the tips that you need to paint your rocks. You're now ready to move on to your masterpiece. So now we're ready to look at our overall painting and decide what it is that we want to do next and to change. What we're going to do is we're going to step back again, give our painting another squint, and decide what it is in the main areas that we want to change. I know that looking at this that I want to cool this area down, get a little more information in here, and I also want to get some mist and things happening. We're going to finish this painting up as completely as possible, and then what we'll do is we'll put in our focal point, that lovely little bird. So I'm going back into the color that I mixed, and that's the Pyro Red Light and the Phthalo Blue. And I'm going to mix up a pile of paint in here. That's a little bit thicker than what I had before, and a little bit bluer. And I'll give that a little test. Now see how the darkness of that is too dark, because again, we want to make that feel further away. To the side of my paint pile that I have already, I'll add white so that I can see how much lighter I've gone. That figure 8, pat, pat, pat of my brush. That's better. Okay, really load that brush up. Still using my flat, squinting my eyes, taking a little bit of medium and water, working my way up in there. That's better. Get some more paint mixed up in here. Have a little bit of warm on one side and cool on the other side. Just a slight change on your palette so that you get that change of warm-cool happening. Okay, so that's a little bit thicker paint. I like that better. Now that I have that blocked in on there, I'm going to actually take a little bit more control and start to shape this island here by doing that negative space painting. That's actually painting around the actual object. So I'm creating two things here. I'm creating the mountain and the island. See, I've covered up a lot more of that orange in the background, which is also helping to make this look cooler. I'm going to add a little bit more white yet, again to that same mixture that I have. I didn't clean my brush off, just kept going. Step back, give that a look. Now while I have this paint going on, I am now shaping this mountain and also creating the form of this mountain here. Still using that up and down stroke, cutting around that tree a little bit. Now I'm going to add even more white, and I'm going to work up into these cloud areas. You want to get that paint nice and thick up here. I'm going to start along this edge. I'm still thinking about the shape of this mountain. This is not the whitest paint that I'm going to have. It's just got a little bit of grayness to it still. And I'm going to create a little bit of a lost edge from the cloud bank up here. And then remember our scumbling method where we put paint on our brush and took a little bit of the paint off? We're going to do that here and just lightly break down into this mountain here. So what happens is you're not really sure where the cloud and the mountain end. This also gives you the opportunity here, if you have anything happening in your trees that you want to change, you can cut around your trees and feather into your trees with dry brushing or thicker paint and reshape some of these things. So if you want to make this a little bit different in here, you can cut around the edges of those trees and then pull your paint out from there and dance that brush around again. Also, when you're working on the sky now, you also have the opportunity of, if you want to put some more sky showing through your trees, you can cut into here and make little areas that are a little bit lighter. This takes a lot of squinting again. Really imagine where that light would shine through. And the other thing you want to do is be aware of where those trunks are. You don't want to have a sky hole painted on top of where the trunk would be. Okay, I can see that I need a bit more change of shade in here just to break up the area of the cloud. That's better. I'm going to switch over from using my flat brush. I'm going to go to my larger round brush, load it with some of that white paint. Now this is dry paint, rolling that brush, patting some of that paint off. Now you can rest your hand on your other hand to steady it, and you can go in here and we're going to just scumble around this area here and create a little bit of a mist. Okay, so that's that pretty dry paint. Some of you might prefer to turn your brush this way. You know, just remember all of your things that you practiced in your brush strokes. You can cut down into that little island. You can use your fingers to push that paint around. Really soft. As you work from the bottom of the mist up, and as you go up, soften that edge out. Look for other areas where you might want to do the same thing. So get more of that white paint, roll it around on that brush, pat that brush, and let's maybe make some scumbles in here. So now that you have your final marks put in, the different things that you want to do to highlight or warm things up or cool things down or darken or lighten, now we get to do the really exciting thing, and that's putting that bird in. The bird is going to actually make this painting come alive, which is awesome. And before I paint that bird in, I'm going to show you a little bit about why the bird is sitting where it sits. In composition, we often divide things into thirds. So if we looked at this painting and decided that we're deciding where to put things, and we call them elements in painting, one of the elements, set of elements are these trees. There's where this horizon line sits. Now if I took a ruler and divided this into thirds this way, coming down here is about where the thirds are, and notice how these trees sit on that 1/3 line. And if I go down here with my chalk and divide this painting further into thirds, approximately, where I want to be down here, it's about 4 inches down, so right about there. So what's happening is these trees are sitting about the 1/3 over, and these are sitting about the 1/3 over, and I'm going to use a measurement that's based on something called the golden mean, which is a measurement based on thirds, but sits just slightly inside. So our bird is actually going to sit approximately in here. And that's a really nice spot to have a focal point. And next you're going to need your transfer paper, and I'm going to use the white this time because I'm transferring onto a dark spot. And I'll need my line drawing. Or again, if you're a good drawer, you can just draw on with chalk. Using a pen and draw that shape in. Make sure you can see it. That shows up quite nicely. What you're going to do is you're going to need your small round brush, and we're going to actually paint the bird in first with a warm gray color. So back to your two colors, whichever two you're using, and it's a bit of a mid-tone gray. Roll that brush into that paint, and the first thing we're just going to fill those wings in with this gray color. The bird will pop out when we outline it in white. If you need to add water to that color, you can. Resting my hand on my other hand to steady it. A little bit of a slight U shape under that tail. And there's a little C shape, C shape right there. Now you don't really see the bird too well yet, but we're going to clean off our brush. roll it through white paint, semi-fluid, just enough so that you can give it a bit of a flow. Again, hold your hand against your other hand and do a little stroke along there and outline that little guy. Outline this little part. Oh, we're starting to get wings. You'll find that you might need to do this more than once just to get that thickness on there. And then on the head, give yourself a kind of an oval shape and fill it in. Sideways like that. And then here, another little oval shape. That's a little bit on an angle. Then outline the bottom of the tail. It's a little U shape like that. I'm going back to my original gray that's still on my palette. I'm going to put a little tiny dot for that eye. Now once I have that dot on the eye, I'm just going to go in here and put a little bit more of a dent into where his little neck is. Bring it up into that where his beak would be. One more time, back into the white. So keep going with that until you're happy with it. And there you've got a little bird. You might need a little foot down there. So now you have a nice focal point on your painting, somewhere where your eye goes to. Another thing that creates a focal point is having something that's quite dark and a little bit bigger around something that is smaller and lighter. And that's a great way to make your eye come into a focal point like that. So now you have finished your masterpiece, which is awesome. You should feel really good about yourself. You've learned so much in this workshop. You've done so many things. You've got this painting where you've created distance with aerial perspective. You've done your darks, your midtones, your lights. You've learned about warm coming forward and cool going back, and about how putting in those final details that you suddenly have this finished painting. With very little detail, you have something that has lots of impact. So congratulations, way to go. And what we'll do next is we'll sign our painting and give your masterpiece a protective coating. So next we're going to use our small round brush for putting on our signature. And when you put your signature onto a painting, look for the best side to put it on. On this one, I'm going to put it on the right, or the left side over here. Sometimes I do sign on the right depending on what my painting looks like and what's the best spot. For signing your painting, I suggest you put your first and your last name, or at least your last name, not just your first, unless you're somebody who only uses your first name, because over time you'll be known by your name. It's a really important thing to have people recognize who the artwork is by. So I'm rolling my brush down in the white paint, and it's a little bit fluid. If you want, practice your signature on a piece of paper first, and just get used to how you want to sign it. Some people like to do their signature all in capital letters. Some people like to make it like a script signature. Some people like to do it up or lower. I have practiced my signature and made a decision to make mine in capital letters. And I have fairly fluid paint. And I join my R to my J just as a little fun thing. And I have a lot of A's in my name. And I actually don't put the crosses on my A's, I just leave it. I also don't like my signature to be too obtrusive. So sometimes when I put it on like this, I look at it and it's standing too much, it's showing too much on the painting. So I'm going to dry that with my blow dryer and put a bit of a glaze over top of it just to push the signature back a little bit. I'm going to take some of my transparent paints, take my quinacridone red and my Hansa yellow, and make a bit of a red color. I'm going to add a tiny bit of blue to it just to make it less bright. And take a little bit of my medium to thin it down. I'm just going to cover that signature over just a little bit. And see how it blends a little bit better into the painting and it's less obtrusive. Sometimes on a smaller painting like this, I just put my last name just so it doesn't take up so much room, especially when they're little ones like that.